All right, I want to have an important discussion about Trump's phone call with Putin yesterday because we don't even need to know what was said on the call to understand that Putin took a massive victory and democracy across the globe took a massive loss. How do we know that? Well, number one, Zelenskyy was left out of the phone call. They didn't even include Zelenskyy in the negotiation phone call. It was just Trump and Putin. Number two, Trump posted this long Truth Social post gushing about Vladimir Putin after. And number three, a bunch of leaders across Europe came out in the middle of the night and said, hey, we can't have peace talks about Ukraine without Zelenskyy involved and without a bunch of us involved. Europe needs to be involved. Statements from countries including France, Germany, and UK comes after US president says he and Putin are ready to begin talks. There's so much wrong with this, and that's why we're here to break it down. Make sure you drop a like, make sure you subscribe, and let's just start here. Donald Trump, whether he intentionally did it or not, is legitimizing Russia's imperial ambitions and is legitimizing Vladimir Putin on the world stage. Putin was essentially frozen out of the West, frozen out for the past few years because you don't negotiate with bad faith dictators. Look what happened when we tried to appease Hitler. Time and time again, we tried to appease Hitler, but who didn't? Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill refused to even speak with Hitler because he understood that Hitler was a bad faith actor who breaks deals in the same way that Putin broke the Budapest Memorandum. So Putin is suddenly back at the table. He's no longer an isolated pariah, and Trump, without even consulting Ukraine, announced that negotiations to end the war would begin immediately, and this already gives Putin the upper hand. If it's Putin and Trump talking, Putin gets the first word. He gets to dictate the field that they're playing on. And here is the big worry. I'm just going to get to the point. Here is my main worry. I talk about this all of the time, but Russia's strategy is to start a war, conveniently pause or stop that war when it serves their interests, and then reignite that war just a few years down the road. So they did this in Georgia. They invaded in 2008, then they stopped. Then they invaded Crimea in 2014. Then they paused. They froze the war. Then they reinvaded in 2022. And if you follow that pattern, then Putin will continue to invade. And what Trump just did is he confirmed that Putin's strategy works. You can invade a country. You can claim a part of its territory as independent. You can move in troops, move in resources, maybe even create some separatist movements that will say, hey, we're the real Russians, we want to stay here, and then wait until global fatigue sets in and you get that piece of land. And what Putin's going to do is go piece by piece by piece. And we already have the historical roadmap for it. So think about it. Putin invaded Crimea in 2014. And then the West, we were weak about it. Obama was pretty weak about it. He was like, no, you can't do that. And Putin said, okay, I'll stop. But he kept his troops in Crimea and he occupied it for 8 years until 2022. He relaunches the war entirely, and the US and NATO and Europe and the world as a whole was doing a great job of, number one, making sure Ukraine can push back so Russia doesn't get any concessions. Number two, making Putin a pariah on the global stage so countries like China wouldn't even think about invading Taiwan. And number three, making it clear that, hey man, you can't just invade your next door neighbor. But now what Trump's doing is he is validating this entire strategy that Putin has. He's making it so that Putin can actually get the territory. And I can bet, we know that Putin is a bad faith actor. Within the next 5 to 10 years, I don't know how much time Putin has left, but I'm sure he has people waiting to replace him. In the next 5 to 10 years, they will relaunch the invasion, maybe even sooner. I mean, we know that Russia thrives on a wartime economy, right? And we're going to read Trump's Truth Social post in 1 second, but I just want to finish my rant right here. Russia thrives on a wartime economy, which means that they'll relaunch a war within the next few years almost certainly. And then Putin will have some new reason like, oh, there's a security concern here. And then if the West doesn't push back, which it seems like we've lost the ability, at least in America, then Putin's entire strategy is validated. But it gets even worse because now Trump and his allies are reinforcing the second prong of Russia's wartime strategy, and that's propaganda, the war on truth, disinformation, whatever the hell you want to call it. Russia has been flooding Western media with fake news, with Russia-sympathetic narratives, with conspiracy theories about Ukraine and about Zelenskyy stealing all of our taxpayer dollars, even though we weren't even sending taxpayer dollars, we were sending 80% military equipment. 80% of the aid we sent was military equipment that we could then restock, update, upgrade, and that helps American manufacturing and protects our ally at the same time. But the American right-wing media machine has been primed to push Kremlin talking points and make Americans think that it's not a good idea. It's not a good idea to fund Ukraine. Let's read this Trump tweet. And again, all that I ask is that you drop some blue hearts and watch until the end so this message can get out to more people. But this phone call is so damn infuriating because you can tell that Putin tickled his balls or whatever the hell. Donald Trump, I'll read parts of this. He says, I just had a lengthy and highly productive phone call with Vladimir Putin. We discussed Ukraine, the Middle East, energy, AI, the power of the dollar, and various other subjects. I'm glad they got to reconnect like old schoolgirls. And apparently they've talked multiple times over the past few years, even when Trump wasn't president. They've got a friendly relationship. We both reflected on the great history of our nations. Already just odd. When Putin's reflecting on the great history of Russia, it's because he's trying to expand Russia and prime you to think that Russia actually has a legitimate claim to Ukraine. And the fact that we fought so successfully together in World War II, remembering that Russia lost tens of millions of people and we lost so many. We talked about the strengths of our respective nation, the benefit that we will someday have in working together. Putin has no interest. Oh my God. Putin literally tricked Trump into thinking that he is sympathetic to the West. Putin innately hates everything about the West. He hates liberalism. I'm not talking about the liberalism that Trump talks about. I mean like actual liberalism, freedom of speech, freedom to practice whatever religion you want, freedom to love whoever you want, free trade. He hates the concept of liberalism, and he hates social liberal ideals. He hates everything about the West, and he is playing Trump like a pawn. Sorry, let me continue. But first, as we both agreed, we want to stop the millions of deaths taking place in the war that Russia unilaterally launched. If you want to stop the deaths, Russia could simply withdraw its troops. He then says, President Putin even used my very strong campaign motto of common sense. The first thing I thought when I read this, honestly, the first thing I thought is Putin absolutely had a team research what Trump has been talking about over the past year, and they found the very common phrase, common sense, that Trump says all of the time, and Putin, I can almost guarantee, prepped to say that so Trump would get a reaction. It's like when I see on a girl's dating profile that she likes the Beatles, so then we go out on a date, and I'm like, yeah, I was just listening to this Beatles song. It's literally the exact same thing. You guys get what I'm saying, right? Right here. We both believe very strongly in it. We agreed to work together very closely, including visiting each other's nations. That is the big piece. We're now about to see Putin visit the USA, and Trump's going to visit the Kremlin. Lord have mercy. We have also agreed to have our respective teams start negotiations immediately, and we will begin by calling President Zelenskyy of Ukraine to inform him of the conversation. That is so odd. You're going to call Zelenskyy and inform him of the negotiations happening about his own country. It makes zero sense, and that is exactly why, really quickly, European powers, including Britain, France, and Germany, have said they have to be a part of any future negotiations on the fate of Ukraine, underscoring that only a fair accord with security guarantees would ensure lasting peace. Quote, our shared objectives should be to put Ukraine in a position of strength. Ukraine and Europe must be a part of any negotiations, said 7 European countries and the European Commission. Quote, Ukraine should be provided with strong security guarantees. A just and lasting peace in Ukraine is a necessary condition for the strong transatlantic community. And imagine how terrifying it would be. Some of you don't have to imagine because you live in Europe, but imagine living in Europe right now and knowing that the big bully just got away with it. The big bully, Russia, I'm not even trying to be funny or like exaggerating here. They literally bully the shit out of European countries. They just got away with it, and their entire tactic has been legitimized by who's supposed to be your number one ally, America. But apparently alliances don't mean anything when you have such a transactional president. But then also, to make matters even worse, I've already covered how Zelenskyy was left out of the negotiations, how Putin easily took a win and flattered Donald Trump, how Trump is transactional, but also Trump sent Pete Hegseth, the DUI hire, to Europe to give a speech, and Pete basically gave concessions without alerting anybody before. So Pete randomly comes out there and he says, Ukraine will not be a part of NATO and Ukraine will not return to its 2014 borders. You are in the process of saying that, conceding things that should be left to behind closed doors negotiations. Let me let John Bolton explain it. I know that we don't like John Bolton, but he is right on the issue of Ukraine.
Either. Putin has scored a whole series of victories today. It's hard to encompass them all, but I think one, in addition to these substantive concessions, is that he has now, it seems, exactly what he wants. Putin doesn't want to negotiate with Zelenskyy. He wants to negotiate with Trump because he thinks he'll get more out of him, and he's absolutely right.
I mean, he is absolutely right there. Yes, of course. And then Bolton says also,
but he noticed that Putin had picked up that line. It's another stroke of flattery. I mean, you got to say Putin hasn't forgotten his lessons as a KGB agent maneuvering an operative around. And there are broader significances than just in Ukraine. This is a palpable harm to American national security. Because what Hegseth and Trump did today was not only blow up the NATO position on Ukraine, they blew up a thing called the Belavasia Accords that Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia signed in December of 1991 that broke up the Soviet Union along the lines of the internal republics. So it means that not only is unprovoked aggression by Russia against Ukraine now okay, every other former republic in the Soviet Union is vulnerable to the same thing without any indication that the U.S. will do anything about it. And I think the people who are paying the closest attention to this outside of in Ukraine are in Beijing, where they see the United States unwilling to act against unprovoked aggression in the center of Europe. What are they thinking now about Taiwan?
Yeah, and this is why I always try to explain to Republicans that putting America first, if you want to put America first on the global stage, that means defending Ukraine. Because China is eyeing Taiwan. This has implications on North Korea and South Korea. This has implications on the rest of Europe, and it absolutely affects America's security. How is allowing Russia, our #1 enemy over the past few decades, clearly our enemy? You could watch any movie from the 80s or 90s, and there's always like a Russian villain. But even putting that aside, how is it America first to allow Putin and Xi Jinping to dictate the terms of international law? Why would Putin's warped view of international law be something that we even interact with? You don't even interact with him or give him any sort of credence. But I'll leave it at that. Make sure you drop a like, subscribe if you appreciate these videos. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.